Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tony Lajeunesse, President and CEO of TL Financial Group. Thanks for attending today's webinar regarding IRA planning and strategies to help you save taxes and get the most out of your IRA. Today is segment 3 and the last one in our series. So last week we covered 4 themes: holding off your IRA distributions. We covered Roth conversions with the pros and cons of that. We learned how to move your retirement money. And lastly, we learned how to coordinate your IRA planning with your other assets. And we're actually going to continue with that topic as we begin today's last segment. Today's webinar is in listen-only mode. So as always, if you have any questions for me, please email me or call the office to set up some time, and I will be happy to help you out. All right, let's go ahead and get started. All right, some of you may have all of your savings in retirement accounts, but many of you probably have some other savings in IRAs or 401ks and the like, with other savings in other non-retirement type assets. If that's the case for you, one strategy, one savvy strategy you may want to consider is, of course, coordinating your IRA with your overall plan and carefully selecting which of your investments are purchased with IRA money and which investments are purchased with non-retirement money. Doing so could help you meaningfully lower your tax bill. Let me show you what we mean by that. Here's an example. Let's imagine that you have $100,000 in an IRA and $100,000 in a non-IRA account. Let's also imagine that you want to purchase $100,000 of bonds with a hypothetical interest of 4% and $100,000 of stocks that will pay a hypothetical qualified dividends of 4%. Also assume that you plan to live off the income of these investments that these investments generate, and that you're in the 24% income tax bracket. In the first scenario, you see, all of the stocks are purchased inside the IRA, and they generate $4,000 of qualified dividends. In general, qualified dividends receive special tax treatment and are taxed as long-term capital gains tax rates. These rates are lower than ordinary income tax rates. However, because this investment was made inside of an IRA and all withdrawals from the IRA are taxed as ordinary income tax rates, if you take a withdrawal of the $4,000 of qualified dividends, they're actually going to be taxed at your hypothetical 24% ordinary tax rate, resulting in a tax bill of $960. In the same scenario, you have $100,000 of bonds that also generate $4,000 of bond interest, and that's taxed at an ordinary income too. So that means that you'll owe another $960 on tax that is on income, bringing your total bill, your total tax bill to $1,920. Now, in the second scenario, the bond purchases are made inside an IRA. They generate the same $4,000 of interest as before, and if withdrawn from an IRA, will be taxed at your hypothetical 24% tax rate. This gives you the same $960 tax bill for your interest as you had before. Now, however, you're purchasing your stocks with non-IRA money, and your qualified dividends are taxed at a long-term capital gains tax rate. If your ordinary income tax bracket is 24%, then you have a 15% rate on the long-term capital gains. Now your tax bill on your qualified dividends drops to $600, bringing your total tax bill to $1,560. That's a $360 difference compared to the first scenario, and a tax savings of nearly 25%. In both scenarios, you're invested exactly the same amount of money in exactly the same investments, and you look at that you're in the exact same investments, and you took exactly the same amount of investment risk. However, in scenario two, you get to spend an extra $360 simply because your savvy planning worked out so well. So remember, when it comes to your investments, it's not just what you own, but it's where you own it. It's really important to remember. Of course, you should always be aware that anytime that you're dealing with investments, there's no guarantee that they're going to perform as expected. And while I don't anticipate the special tax rate for long-term capital gains to be eliminated anytime soon, it probably will go up. There are no crystal balls to predict what Congress will do in the future. So we just have to be cognizant of that and make our planning as it pertains to us in every tax calendar year. Another way that your IRA planning needs to be coordinated is with your overall retirement plan regarding your Social Security claiming strategies. This decision of when to file for Social Security is really one that far too many retirees make without thoroughly evaluating their options first. And this is really a major mistake, that one that in some cases can cost you more than $100,000 of income over the course of your retirement. Now, the decision of when to claim Social Security is a very personal decision, and one that varies significantly from person to person and couple to couple. That said, many retirement experts today believe that too many people claim Social Security too soon. Remember, Social Security benefits are guaranteed to last your entire lifetime, no matter how long you live. And benefits are generally increased from one year to the next based on cost of living adjustments. Additionally, delaying receiving your Social Security benefits past what's called your full retirement age, the FRA, it's 66 for most people, this will allow you to earn an additional 8% increase in payments each year until you turn age 70 through what's known as deferred credits. For these reasons and more, it may be beneficial to claim Social Security benefits later than what you planned for, but not one shoe fits all circumstances. Therefore, we highly recommend that you have a customized analysis that is tailored to your unique situation, and we can provide you with that analysis if needed. Again, it really is based on the individual or the couple as to when you should claim your Social Security, and it really just needs to be tailored and customized to your individual circumstances. But if you have to eat in the meantime, right, that might require you to pull money from your IRA in the interim to help cover your current living expenses. Retirees sometimes opt not to do this because they say, well, what if I die early? I'll have spent my IRA money down, which takes away from my heirs, and I've gotten little or nothing for it. While that's certainly something to consider, here are two reasons why you may want to give that approach a second thought. First, a 2012 report from the Center of Retirement Research at Boston College concluded that Social Security is one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest, annuity available. That might sound a little funny. After all, you don't buy Social Security, right? In a way, though, you kind of do. If you use IRA money to hold off on claiming your Social Security for, say, a year, that's kind of the price that you paid to get the higher benefit. If you compare that price and the increased benefit to what you can get from commercial annuity providers, it's almost always cheaper. Another reason it can make sense to draw from your IRA in order to help, delaying your Social Security benefits is that Social Security benefits are generally more tax efficient than IRA withdrawals. Remember, when you take an IRA withdrawal, the entire amount is generally added to your income and taxed at whatever tax rate you happen to be in. In contrast, Social Security benefits may be anywhere from a 15% tax-free all the way up to 100% tax-free. So the key point is for you is that trading $1 of IRA income on your tax return for delayed Social Security benefits will almost always leave you with a lower tax bill and more money to spend. If you're interested in learning more about Social Security and how to claim your benefits, we do have a 1-hour webinar on our website that you can access. All right, let's move on to our next IRA planning strategy, number 5, and that's coordinating your IRA planning with your estate plan. In most estate plans, there are really two primary goals. First is to make sure that your assets pass to your intended beneficiaries, and secondly, that they're passed to them as efficiently as possible. When it comes to IRAs and 401ks and other retirement accounts, that's done with one form in particular, and it's called a beneficiary designation form. I really can't emphasize how important this is, and yet time and time again, people fail to update these forms after major life events such as births, deaths, marriages, and divorces. Many times people think that because they've updated their will, everything is taken care of, but that's not so. For example, if you have your ex-wife or ex-husband named on your IRA beneficiary form, but your will has been updated to say your assets go to your children upon your death, guess who's getting your IRA? That's right, your ex. So I can't tell you how often this has happened to people, and you really want to make sure that you avoid it. That's why it's so important to keep your updated copies of your beneficiary forms with all of your important estate planning documents. It's something we're manic about. We double check our beneficiaries on our clients' accounts at least once a year. Such an important issue. All right, now that you understand the importance of the beneficiary form, let's talk a little more about IRA beneficiaries. Any person or entity can be an IRA beneficiary, but there are different post-death withdrawal rules depending on the type of beneficiary you selected. Broadly speaking, there are 3 main types of IRA beneficiaries after what's called the Secure Act. There are non-designated beneficiaries, there are designated beneficiaries, and then there's eligible designated beneficiaries. They sure do like to make this stuff confusing. As you can probably guess by looking at this slide, non-designated beneficiaries generally have the worst tax treatment, and eligible designated beneficiaries generally have the most favorable tax treatment. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, shouldn't I just make sure all my beneficiaries are eligible designated beneficiaries then? And unfortunately, in many cases, that's just not possible, at least if you want to make sure that the specific people get your life savings. For instance, take a look at the different types of eligible designated beneficiaries here. Certainly no one is going to hope that their beneficiaries are disabled or chronically ill. And if you don't have minor children now, it's highly unlikely you're going to have one in the future. So the trusts you see there are generally only trusts where the one beneficiary is another type of eligible designated beneficiary, such as a disabled person. So that doesn't work, which leaves you with the beneficiaries who are not more than 10 years younger than you are, which generally won't apply unless you're leaving your IRA to your siblings or friends or spouse. If you're married, chances are that your spouse is your beneficiary, but when the second death occurs, who will your collective retirement funds be left to? And in many cases, it's going to be your adult children who fall into that middle blue category. So let's take a little closer look at the rules for post-death distributions for each of these categories of beneficiaries, because it's really, really important. So let's start with the group of beneficiaries that generally has the most unfavorable tax treatment. These are the non-designated beneficiaries. This group is comprised of beneficiaries that have no life expectancy and includes beneficiaries such as your estate and charity. As you can see, the rules for how quickly money must be distributed from an inherited account after death depends on how old the owner of the account was when they passed away. In many cases, That means such beneficiaries must distribute the entire inherited amount within 5 years. This can lead to big lumps of income that get taxed at much higher tax rates than an owner may have paid during their lifetime. And we presume that tax rates are going to go up in the near future. Next, we have designated beneficiaries. If you have named children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, or other similar close family members who are not your spouse as your beneficiary, there's a good chance that they're going to fall into this IRA category, beneficiary category. In the past, this group of beneficiaries was able to take advantage of something commonly known as the stretch IRA, which is where distributions from the inherited account could be spread over the individual's life expectancy. This allowed the tax benefits of the retirement account to last for as long as possible and kept taxable income each year to a minimum. Unfortunately, though, the Secure Act, yes, that same law from 2019 I brought up earlier in our other segments, eliminated this tax benefit for regular designated beneficiaries. Now, instead, this group of beneficiaries has to distribute the entire IRA by the end of the 10th year after they inherit it. This new 10-year rule isn't as bad as the 5-year rule that hits some of the non-designated beneficiaries, but it's a far cry from the decades that some children, grandchildren, etc., had to spread out their distributions before the Secure Act was actually enacted. So those of you who expect to pass on a large retirement account to their heirs should be mindful of this change, as it might influence planning decisions during your lifetime, such as how much, if anything, should I convert to a Roth IRA, which we talked about in segment 2. So the new 10-year rule, effective for most IRA beneficiaries and plan beneficiaries, began in January of 2020. Exceptions exist for governmental plans, though. I do want to make a note of this. Collectively bargained plans are also some exceptions, and certain qualified annuities where the lifetime income option was irrevocably selected prior to 2020. So if you fall into one of those 3 categories, give me a call and I will help you work through the nuances of that. Finally, we get to the brand new type of beneficiary called by the Secure Act, which is eligible designated beneficiaries. Eligible designated beneficiaries are the only beneficiaries left who are, wait for it, eligible to stretch distributions using the rules that were in place before the Secure Act was passed. As we discussed before, however, it's a pretty limited list and doesn't help the many of you who plan to eventually leave your retirement assets to your adult children or other persons who don't fall into one of those above categories. And this is what it means to stretch IRA distributions. Eligible designated beneficiaries and only eligible designated beneficiaries are able to take minimum distributions that are calculated over the IRS provided life expectancy tables. The stretch IRA then is just the name that practitioners have given the strategy of a beneficiary taking only the minimum amount of the inherited IRA each year that's required by law. Doing so helps an eligible designated beneficiary to minimize their income and therefore reduce their tax and maximize the tax deferral of the inherited account. In contrast, all other beneficiaries typically have to withdraw all inherited IRA money much sooner, as we discussed. So the heirs have to pull all that money out within the first 10 years. They can defer it for 10 years and then pull it all out at the 10th year. They can take 1/10 of it each year. So there's a lot of flexibility in how they can take it. But if they don't take it by the 10th year, there is a 50% penalty on the amount that they were supposed to take. So it's not something to make a mistake on, because 50% is a bad mistake that you don't want to have happen. So one question many people ask is whether or not they should leave their IRA assets to a trust. Now, trusts are certainly good at providing post-death control, and that it's a major, and if it's a major concern for you, it's certainly something to consider. However, naming a trust as your IRA beneficiary adds considerable complexity to your estate plan. If drafted properly, trusts can be treated as designated beneficiaries and preserve the stretch IRA. All too often, though, however, they do not meet the specific requirements outlined by the IRS, and they end up having to follow the less favorable rules for the non-designated beneficiaries. Even if drafted properly, even if it's drafted properly, trusts come with certain costs, such as the cost to prepare the trust, the cost for filing the annual trust income tax returns, and of course, there's accelerated taxation of any IRA withdrawals that are held inside that trust. Ultimately, naming a trust as your IRA beneficiary is a very complicated matter, and it's something that really should be carefully considered and discussed with your full team of advisors, including your tax advisor, your estate planning attorney, and of course, your financial planner. The Secure Act really complicated the issue with trusts being a beneficiary of your IRA assets. And like I said here in our notes today, it's very complex and you just don't want to have a mistake. Oftentimes, you're better off leaving your beneficiaries as the primary beneficiaries of your account or the contingent beneficiaries of your account and not naming the trust. But it's specific and different for each individual, of course. So you really want to make sure you have it examined as it pertains to you. Many people name their spouse as the beneficiary of their IRA, which is very normal. So let's talk about that for a moment. If your spouse is your sole IRA beneficiary, then he or she will generally have several options after inheriting the IRA. They include choosing to remain a beneficiary of your account, as well as making what is known as a spousal rollover. So let's talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. As I just mentioned, one option a spouse beneficiary has is completing a spousal rollover. In a spousal rollover, the surviving spouse takes the deceased spouse's IRA and moves it right into their own IRA. A spousal IRA rollover is an irrevocable decision once it's completed. So once you do it, it's done. The funds are treated as though they were always in the surviving spouse's IRA. This is generally the best option for spouses who inherit at 59 and a half or older. Another option available to the spouse beneficiaries is remaining as a beneficiary of the inherited account. This is generally the preferred option if a spouse inherits prior to turning age 59 and a half, because it allows them to take penalty-free distributions from the inherited account, regardless of their age. In contrast, if they were to make a spousal rollover, the money would be treated as their own, and therefore any distributions taken prior to age 59 and a half would generally be assessed with a 10% early distribution penalty. If you're a spouse beneficiary and you inherit prior to reaching age 59 and a half, you can remain the beneficiary until you turn 59 and a half, and then at that time, execute a spousal rollover. We've done that many times here at our firm for our clients. In fact, more often than not, that's usually the best approach. There are other special rules that apply to spouse IRA beneficiaries, so it's always best to consult with us when you're faced with that decision or that option. All right, with that, we've come to our last savvy IRA planning strategy. And it's one that you should all know about, but for whatever reason, people do seem to forget this one. And that's to always do your homework before making any decisions with your IRA, especially when it comes to investments. IRAs are often the target of schemes and scams because, hey, let's face it, that's where a lot of people's savings are at, right? So it attracts these types of people. I know it, you know it, but you know who else knows it? That's right, these scammers. So in recent years, the SEC has issued alerts warning certain IRA owners that they may be the target of scams of the IRS. Uh, or they may be a target of scams, and the IRS has even put out a publication with the title that says the IRS does not approve IRA investments, in response to many fraudulent promoters claiming that their IRA investments were somehow given the green light by the IRS. And that is not true. At the end of the day, it comes down to the golden rule. If it sounds too good to be true, then it usually mostly is. Your IRA may represent a lifetime's worth of work and savings, so don't squander it by making a foolish decision and getting caught off guard by these scammers. Okay, now we've certainly covered a lot of ground in all three of these segments, and you should have plenty of food for thought. As you probably realize at this point, IRA planning is a lot more complicated than most people realize. And let's face it, deciding what strategies are best for your IRA really comes into every part of your planning, from tax planning to investment planning and estate planning. Few retirees are aware of just how critical IRA planning can be, and even fewer take the time to evaluate all the issues and develop a comprehensive solution. However, hopefully, we've helped answer some of those questions for you and for you, but chances are that you still might have some questions. So we're here to help answer those questions for you. We can evaluate your current financial plan and come up with a strategy that is going to be smart and efficient for you. So thanks again for joining me. And as always, I'm here to help you. If you have any questions, you please feel free to call me or email me at our phone number or at my email address. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you at our next month's webinar. Take care and have a great day and be safe.